In order for you to grow spiritually and get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and more connected, a prerequisite for that, the only way it can be done, is through working on yourself to be like HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Wherever you get your podcasts from, or our own website, prismoftorah.com. This is Rebbe Saf Aaron Prisman on the Parsha, the Prism of Torah. This week, Parshas Eikev, Middos and Torah, a two-way street.
Shalom to everyone. This week's Parsha, Parshas Eikev, I want to share with you a phenomenal concept that is brought down by the Heilige Chofetz Chaim in his famous sefer Ahavas Chesed. If you look carefully in the Zakdama, in the introduction, the preface of his sefer, he explains how Chesed is a very intrinsic idea in Yiddishkeit. He says that the Torah starts off with Chesed, an act of Chesed HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for Adam and Chava, that he creates for them clothing, and the Torah ends off with an act of Chesed. And throughout the Torah, it's embedded with a lot of acts of Chesed and a lot of the mitzvahs, like Matnois Anim, like Pea and Leket, Shichacha, etc., Tzedakah. Is their whole idea, the whole essence of the mitzvahs, a lot of them are Chesed, etc., etc. But then in his first Hagah, over there, in the introduction, in the Psicha, he says something very, very interesting that I think is very important to shed some light on, and I want to share it with you. And it's based on our Parsha. He says that the idea of going in the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, laleches bidrachav, to go in his ways, is mentioned 3 times in the Parsha. 3 times. And I'll tell you exactly where those places are. The first place is in Perek Ches, Pasuk Vav. It says, V'shamarta es mitzvahs Hashem Elokecha, and you shall observe the commandments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then it says, Laleches bidrochov, to go in his ways, Uleira oisoi, and fear him. Then, the second place is found in Perek Yud, Pasuk Yud Beis. V'ata Yisrael ma Hashem Elokecha shoel mi'imach. And now, Jewish people, what is Hashem asking of you? Kim lira es Hashem Elokecha, to fear him. But also it says, Laleches bechol drochav, again, to go in all his ways. And then it says, and to love him, Ulahava osoi, ulavud es Hashem Elokecha. And the third place in this week's Parsha, in Shvi, in Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Kaf Beis, it says the following: Kim shamor tishmerun es kol ha-mitzvah azois, asher nochi metzaveh eschem la'asoisa. If you do my mitzvah, etc., etc., then it says la'ava es Hashem Elokecha, to love Hashem, and then it says again to go in His ways, laleches bechol drochov. Uledavka voy. The exact translation, ledavka voy, means to cleave to him. So the Chofetz Chaim says, it's very interesting. If you look at these 3 instances of where it says to go in Hashem's way, laleches bedrochov, once it says it right before the concept of iras Hashem, fear of Hashem. The second time it says it right before the idea of lahava oisoi, to love Hashem. And the third time, it says it right before this idea of cleaving to Him, to connect to Hashem, to be l'davka boy, to be with Him all the time. Says the Chofetz Chaim, as we know, there is 3 levels a person can reach. On the high level, of course. There is iras Hashem, fear of Hashem, step number 1. Step number 2 is Ahavas Hashem, love of Hashem. And step number 3, or level number 3, is to cleave to Hashem, to always be continuously connected to Hashem. The Ramban, at the end of this week's Parsha, the Chofetz Chaim alludes to him, and he also explains that the difference between Ahavas Hashem, to love Hashem, and even more, the higher level of cleaving to Hashem, is that Ahavas Hashem, from time to time, you can suddenly feel very connected to Hashem. But l'davka, to cleave to Him, it means all the time you're connected to Him, Kadosh Baruch Hu. All the time. Says the Chofetz Chaim, what's the idea that it says so many times, 3 times, Aleches Bidrochov, to go in Hashem's ways? And why is it mentioned in 3 different instances? Says the Chofetz Chaim, I want to teach you something. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us that every step of the way, in order for you to grow spiritually and get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and more connected, a prerequisite for that, the only way it can be done, is through working on yourself to be like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As Rashi in this week's Parsha tells us, Mahu achum afatarachum. You have to try to mimic the Yud Gimel Middos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the characteristics, the attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the idea of being like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is merciful, and all those Yud Gimel Middos a person has to try to emulate to his best, and through that, working on that will bring you to a higher level. And that's why, says the Chofetz Chaim, with that I can explain another two questions I had on this whole idea, Laleches Bidrochov, to go in his ways. Because he says, obviously the last 2 levels are the higher levels, Ahavas Hashem, to love Hashem, and to cleave to Him, L'dav Kabot, to always be connected to Him. And those 2, it doesn't say, those 2, it says, Laleches Bechol Drachav, in all His ways, meaning all the Yud Gimel Midos, all the Yud Gimel characteristics of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to emulate and work on it as much as you can. Only through that you can reach a higher level of Avodas Hashem and connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whereas the first level of fearing Hashem, it says Laleches B'Drachav. It doesn't say Bechol Drachav, in all His ways. It just says in a general way to go in His ways. So if you go in His ways, even if you didn't manage to work on all the 13 attributes, all the Yud Gimel Midah, still it seems like you can reach the first level of Iras Hashem. The Chofetz Chaim goes on to say, through this, we can also answer 2 other questions. Question number 1 is, why does it not say Ve, and you should go in His ways? It seems more fitting in the pasuk to say Ve halachta b'drachav, and you should go in His ways. Says the Chofetz Chaim, would be misleading, because the halachta b'drachav, if you say Ve, if you have a connection like the word and, it seems like it's connected to the previous step, but it's not true. This is a prerequisite for the next step. So let's say you reached Yiras Hashem, now you're trying to get to Ahavas Hashem, you need to now do Laleches B'Drochov, and then you can reach Ahavas Hashem. And same too with the third instance. It says Laleches B'Chol Drochov, and only then you can L'dav Kabo. It's not a ripple effect, a toitzah, a result of the previous step in your Avodas Hashem, but rather it's a prerequisite to move vital, to go to the higher stage. And even before you do Yiras Hashem, it says, first you have to La'avod Hashem, to go in His ways, and then once you go in Laleches B'Drochav, only then you can reach even the first level of Yiras Hashem. So the concept that comes out of here is very important to know. And this even the Chofetz Chaim speaks out. He says, a person might think, okay, I already reached a certain level, now I can just work on my avodah between me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, learning Torah in my own four amos in my corner, and I'll work on myself in being Bekedusha and Tara, purity level, and go to the mikveh every day, and everything's geschmack, and be pure, and it's, Chofetz Chaim said it's not going to be enough. You need a prerequisite. You need to work on Yud Gimel Midos, helping your fellow Jew, being merciful to others, and whatever, all the attributes, Rachum, V'chanun, Erech HaPayim, forgiving to your friend, and only through that you can get higher up in your spiritual ladder of getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I was thinking to myself, Chofetz Chaim says this is what the Torah is hinting to us. I was thinking to myself, and I asked big Talmidei Chachamim here. One of them was the Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael, Baltimore. He visited us this Shabbos. I was speaking also to Rabbi David, who was a Rosh Yeshiva for many of us in Or Chaim for 4 years. What's the pshat? Is there pshat? Libi oimeli, that there's some sort of deep understanding here why it has to be this way. As we know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's emes and Torah so emes. Now, so I asked, and I didn't really get any answers yet, but I asked, maybe one of you can share with me your thoughts. I'll be very, very appreciative of that. I'm trying to understand. First of all, we know it's emes. The Chofetz Chaim says it, And we're sure it's emes, and it answers all these questions about the psukim in our parsha. But the question is, why is it like that? Is there something intrinsic about us working on our middos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be rachum v'chanun er chapayim, forgiving for our friend and merciful and all that? How is that helping us in our avodas Hashem? In reaching these levels of fearing Hashem, loving Hashem, and cleaving to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I understand maybe the latter two, because the more I work on myself to be like HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a certain level, the more I can be at one with Hashem. I understand that. But yiras Hashem, to have fear of Hashem? So a good friend of mine, Rav Abi Adler, wanted to tell me, maybe pshat is that in order to work on these attributes, you have to ponder about them and think about it and realize what Hashem does. And the acknowledgement of that can yield perhaps to this level of fearing of Hashem. Wow. Fearing of Hashem because you realize what Hashem does. But I'm still not sure. I asked and I'm waiting for answers. The one thing we could see for sure from here is that just like for a person to have better middos, the Torah helps one refine his becoming a better person. Why? Because just like we mentioned several weeks ago, that lichora there's a contradiction in Chazal. In one place it says that derech eretz kadma laTorah, that's in Pirkei Avos, and most Rishonim learn that means middos. For a person to be able to learn Torah and to be compatible with the Torah, klikibul for the Torah, a person has to work on his middos, on being a good person, etc. On the other hand, only through the Torah you can really fine-tune your middos. So isn't that a contradiction? And the answer we gave at the time is because you need a certain foundation in order to start. To be a kli kibul and compatible with the Torah, you first have to be a mensch on a very basic level. Only then you can be compatible with the Torah, and mimele, the Torah helps you get to fine-tune your level, and the dakas level make your middos even better. So too here we see that in order for you to get closer to Hashem, to be a kli kibul, a vessel to accept the new spiritual level, you have to work on your middos. Only through that you can yield this special level of kirvas Hashem, of being connected to Hashem. Ad kedei kach, that the epitome of that is to cleave to Hashem all the time. And you see big tzaddikim that reach this level. I just want to emphasize that a person shouldn't make the mistake and think, learning Torah is not important, chas v'shalom. What's important is chesed. It's not true. You got to put things in context. Of course, the whole sefer of the Chofetz Chaim we're diving off of is Ahavas Chesed. He's explained the importance of chesed, which is important on its own. But of course, it goes to many Chazals tell us how Torah and chesed together is the best combination. And that's what we're talking about here. Even the Torah helps you create the extra level of middos. So a person has to realize that they both complement each other and help each other and thrive off of each other. So yiratzon that we'll be able to work on these middos, and through that be able to pass the prerequisite of getting closer to Hashem, which is what we're here for, really. And I want to share with you, we'll see how much time we have. It's already the 13-minute mark, but I want to share with you a couple of stories that I saw about Gdolei Yisrael, that it's pretty evident that the reason, or the prerequisite, not the only reason, the prerequisite why they got to where they got is because of their middos. So I was walking Rabbi David Shlita home now from Minche, and I asked him to tell me a couple stories. I know he was connected to big doilim from the previous generation. So he told me two stories that have to do with Rav Moshe Feinstein. Both were told to him by his Rebbe, that he witnessed it firsthand. His Rebbe is Rav Nissen Alperin. And he said the following. Story number one, I think I said 3 years ago, or maybe even 4 years ago. He went to his Rebbe's house, Rabbi David, to Rav Nissen Alperin, and he had a big picture framed in his house. And it looked like an Aguda convention of tons of Rabbanim. And Rabbi David's Rav told him, do you see something special about this picture? So Rabbi David's looking at this picture and is thinking to himself, what's so special about this picture? I see many Rabbanim, everyone's sitting down. Well, what's the big deal? He goes, don't you see? No one's listening to the speaker. This was the 7th speaker. No one's listening except for one person. Can you see him? And he points to him and he says, that's Rav Moshe Feinstein. This was the 7th speaker. He's listening to the microphone as if it's the first speaker, and it just shows you the Middos he had. He cared about every Jew. He had such a Ahavas Chesed that he just wanted to give to other people, even though his time, he didn't waste a millisecond, as we know, he was always learning. But when it was not, how can he not listen to someone? That would hurt his feelings. How could he not show kavod to another Jew talking? That was story number one, Rav Moshe Feinstein. Story number two happened around 45, 50 years ago. There was a sefer that came out. Rabbi David didn't want to tell me the name of the sefer, even though I've heard of this before. That came out against Rav Moshe Feinstein, against his very famous Igros Moshe, his sefer of teshuvos. And in that sefer, this person was a very, very big Talmid Chacham. But despite the fact being a Talmid Chacham, he didn't have such an easy life. He went through the Holocaust, but he was a huge Talmid Chacham. Whatever the reason was, Rabbi David wants to tie it because he went through a very bitter life and this and that, doesn't matter. He wrote a sefer that he took everything that Rav Moshe Feinstein said and he tried to, how shall I say, to rip it into shreds, and he didn't do it in the nicest way. He wrote words that were not so matim to speak about a gadol adoyer, Rav Moshe Feinstein, the heilige Rav Moshe Feinstein. Okay, now the way he did it, Rabbi David told me, is he printed out the sefer that it looked almost exactly like the original Igros Moshe. And then when you open up, you realize that he's actually taking each tshuva, everything that Rav Moshe Feinstein said, and he tried to say and prove why it's wrong. Now, he was a big Talmid Chacham, so it's not like everything he wrote had no logic to it. But al kol panim, we know Rav Moshe Feinstein was a gadol adoyer. At least one should have kavod for him, and all his teshuvos were. Rav Moshe Feinstein was a gadol atzum. Al kol panim, Rabbi David said, I was really intrigued and I wanted to buy the sefer, but then my Rebbe said, B'shum panim v'oifen, I'm not letting you buy it. So he didn't buy it. The next day, the whole book was banned, was put in cherem because he spoke so harshly against Rav Moshe Feinstein, and that was the end of that. But then the Talmidim of Rav Moshe Feinstein asked him, what happened here? What happened here? Because what happened was, here's the other flip side of the story. I forget now the name of the publisher. Rabbi David told it to me a couple of hours ago, but I forgot it already. And that, Bloom or something, whatever it was, and that publisher, when that Talmid Chacham wanted to publish his sefer, so the publisher looked at it and he saw that he was really saying harsh things against Moshe Feinstein. He goes, I can never print this out. He goes, what do you mean? It's my parnasa. I'm not going to have parnasa. Please print it out for me. So what happened was, he went to Rav Moshe Feinstein. The publisher went to Rav Moshe Feinstein and he said, is it okay to print this out? So he looked at it, and obviously he realized it was pretty much saying really bad things about Rav Moshe Feinstein, trying to go against everything he said. So he said, why would you want to publish this? So the publisher says, I don't know, because the person's saying it's his parnasa. So he said, it's his parnasa? If it's his parnasa, okay, go print it out. He goes, but what? Yeah, print it out. The godless of Moshe Feinstein was that he was able to do that, but the story doesn't end here. So he published it, and he was only lasted one day because then all the other Rabbanim banned it and said it's put in cherem, etc., etc. But then the story continues. Story continues that this Talmid Chacham, whatever his name was, he then needed to they fired him from, he was a Rosh Yeshiva, but because of his sefer that he tried to put out, they fired him from his yeshiva. He didn't have anything. Finally, another yeshiva was willing to hire him as a Rebbe, but he needed to have a haskama. So he went to no other than Rav Moshe Feinstein. And Rav Moshe Feinstein, he asked him, please give me a haskama, because I need a job. So he wrote him a haskama, a 3-page haskama, which is something that is not like Rav Moshe Feinstein at all. It was probably one of the longest, if not the longest haskama he ever wrote. And his kids and his Talmidim asked him, well, why did you do such a thing? So he says, what do you mean? Yes, I'll be honest with you, it hurt me a bit what he wrote in the sefer. But then that night, I said Kriyat Shema Lamita, and I said, I'm moichel to anyone that hurt me. So that's it, that was the end of that. He said it belev shalom, with a full heart, that he totally forgives this person. So that's it. Now this person needs help, why should I not help him? He needs my help to get parnasa, of course I'm going to help him. Says Rabbi David's Rebbe, Rav Nissen Alperin, he said, that is the real godless of Moshe Feinstein. People think he's a gadol olam because he knows Torah left, right, and center, backwards and forwards. But it's a lot more than that. It's because he worked on his middos. If something like that happened to me and you, we'll be so upset. How can someone write something like that about what I wrote? And I'm gadol adoyer, but no, he didn't look at it that way. and he was able to forgive him in 1 second. Not only that, he was willing to help him. There's many more stories, but already at the 19-minute mark, all we can do is come to internalize this idea, the importance of caring for another Jew, of trying to emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Yud Gimel Middos, and Mirtzeh Hashem. That in itself is an end, but it's not enough. It's also a means to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, we have to learn Torah, because only through Torah we can really get to the high levels of the Middos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because Kudsha Brichu HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Torah and Bnei Yisrael were all one. Yiratzon will be zocheh to that. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you for joining us. This is the Prism of Torah. Visit our website, prismoftorah.com, where you'll find a full archive of hundreds of past Divrei Torah. Subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, and don't forget to share with your friends and family. Sponsorship opportunities are available for all of our episodes. Thank you, Yona Vefa, for your recording equipment. Produced by Eli Podcast Productions.